Picture this. You're at a crowded party. Laughter fills the room, but in the corner, someone approaches you with a compliment that feels too polished. Their words are sweet, but rehearsed. And then, it hits you. You recognize the game. You know this charm because you know how you could use the same tactic if you wanted to disarm someone, to lower their guard. In that instant, you're not just suspicious, you're certain. You're not sensing danger because of what they did, but because of what you could have done if you were in their place. That's your dark side speaking, the mirror you rarely admit exists, but the one that lets you see the hidden intentions of others. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of us that carries impulses we often reject, manipulation, selfishness, envy, even cruelty. We hide these from the world, and sometimes from ourselves. But here's the paradox. If you never confront your shadow, you stay blind to it. And if you're blind to your own capacity for deception, you'll never recognize it in others. That's how bad people slip past unnoticed. They thrive on your denial. So, what happens when you finally face the darker parts of yourself? Could acknowledging your own flaws make you sharper, harder to fool, harder to use? And is it possible that the key to spotting bad people is admitting that under the right circumstances, you could have been one? In this video, we'll dive into the psychology of the dark side, how exploring your shadow makes you wiser, safer, and far less likely to fall for toxic people. We'll uncover lessons from Jung's psychology, real-world examples of manipulation, and why self-awareness is your strongest shield. Stay with me, because what you'll discover today may change the way you read people forever. We like to think of ourselves as good. We introduce ourselves with kindness. We try to be fair. We avoid admitting to jealousy or cruelty. But beneath that polished surface, every human being carries a silent passenger. The shadow. The shadow is the collection of impulses we're told never to admit: envy, selfishness, anger, manipulation. From the moment we're children, we learn that some emotions are ugly, so we push them down, locking them away in the basement of our psyche. We smile when we want to scream. We praise others while hiding the sting of jealousy. We deny. But here's the truth most people never dare to face. Burying something doesn't erase it. What you suppress doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows in the dark. And one day, when you least expect it, it guides your behavior without your consent. Psychologists have long observed that the darker aspects of ourselves don't simply vanish. Instead, when we refuse to confront them, they creep into our lives in subtle ways, snapping at someone we love, enjoying someone else's failure a little too much, or quietly twisting the truth to protect ourselves. We tell ourselves we're incapable of certain things, but history and research prove otherwise. In the right circumstances, ordinary people commit acts they never imagined. That's why the shadow matters. Not because it's evil, but because it's human. It's not just your capacity for cruelty, it's your potential for anything you've been taught to reject. To deny it is to walk blind. To confront it is to see finally. And here's where it becomes dangerous. When you refuse to acknowledge the darkness within, you also lose the ability to recognize it in others. People who live in denial, who insist "I could never lie, never manipulate, never hurt," are the easiest prey. Why? Because if you can't admit you're capable of it, you'll never suspect that someone else island. The shadow is not a monster you must slay. It is a map of what you could become, for better or worse. And only when you look at it honestly do you gain the ability to see others clearly. Because here's the paradox. The moment you face the side of yourself you've always denied, that's the moment you become harder to deceive. Most people believe that danger comes from out there, from the stranger lurking in the dark, from the manipulator plotting behind closed doors. But the truth is far more unsettling. Danger often comes from within. Not because you act on it, but because you refuse to believe you could. When you deny your darker impulses, you don't become pure, you become blind. Blind to the subtle lies in a smile, blind to the small hooks hidden in flattery, blind to the manipulation laced into someone's kindness. Evolutionary psychology suggests that human survival depended on reading threats, recognizing the predator before it struck. We learned to see dishonesty because we knew, deep down, we were capable of it ourselves. But in the modern world, we've replaced instinct with denial. We tell ourselves, "I'm not like that. I would never lie. I could never betray." And by doing so, we cut the wires of our own alarm system. Think of the person who swears, "I never lie." They believe it makes them virtuous, but in reality, it makes them naive. Because if you can't even admit the tiny lies you tell to protect feelings, to escape trouble, to make yourself look better, how could you possibly detect when someone else lies to you? History shows us how devastating this blindness can be. Entire groups have fallen into the hands of leaders who manipulated with charm, promises, and fear. Ordinary people ignored the warning signs because they couldn't imagine deception so large it was beyond what they admitted possible in themselves. And this is why denial is not innocence, it's weakness. When you push your dark side away, you give it to others to use against you. But here's the unsettling twist. When you begin to acknowledge your own impulses, the envy, the selfishness, the small acts of dishonesty, you sharpen your vision. Suddenly, you don't just see words and smiles. You see patterns, cracks, and hidden motives. You notice when the charm is too smooth, when the generosity is calculated, when the flattery is a leash disguised as kindness. Denial makes you vulnerable. Awareness makes you dangerous to those who would use you. There's a strange gift in knowing the darker parts of yourself. They become a compass, a radar, a silent detector of lies. When someone flatters you, you know if it's genuine or if it's bait because you've stood in that place before. You've felt how easy it is to twist a compliment into a tool. When someone manipulates through guilt, you see it for what it is, because you've glimpsed how guilt can be used to bind people in chains. Psychology explains this through something called mirroring. Our brains are wired with neurons that fire when we act, but also when we imagine acting. It's why we flinch when we see someone stub their toe. But it's also why, when you've confronted your own capacity for dishonesty, you can sense it vibrating in someone else's voice. It's not magic, it's recognition. You can read the game because you've admitted you could play it. Most people who fall for manipulators don't lack intelligence, they lack self-awareness. They believe they're too nice to deceive, so they assume everyone else must be, too. And that innocence becomes a weakness others exploit. But once you've stared into your own darkness, you can't be tricked in the same way. Researchers who study con men note that their tactics are rarely new. They rely on charm, false vulnerability, and mirroring their target's desires. Yet those who recognize their own shadow catch it quickly. They don't just hear the words, they feel the intention. They know when a smile is masking hunger. This is the paradox. The darker truths you've faced within yourself become light in the outside world. Your flaws become tools of detection. Your shadow, once your fear, becomes your armor. Because when you can admit, yes, I could lie, I could manipulate, I could harm, you become the very person who can never again be fooled by those who will. Manipulators are not rare. They are everywhere, woven into everyday life. And the most chilling part? They don't need to be geniuses. They rely on timeless tricks, the same patterns repeated across history. One of their favorite weapons is a charm. It disarms, it lowers your defenses. A fraudster knows that before stealing your money, they must first steal your trust. And how do they do it? With words you've longed to hear. Promises of safety, of wealth, of belonging. But here's the trap. Those who've never admitted their own ability to charm or manipulate are the easiest to fool. They assume kindness is always pure. They assume generosity is always honest. They assume the mask is the face. Decades ago, a psychological experiment shocked the world. In the Stanford prison experiment, ordinary students were given roles, guards, and prisoners. Within days, those chosen as guards slipped into cruelty, mocking, humiliating, even breaking down their peers. These weren't monsters, they were everyday people, but the environment gave their shadow room to breathe. What does this reveal? That manipulation, control, and cruelty aren't traits of bad people only. They're human potentials, and if you refuse to acknowledge your own capacity for them, you'll never recognize when someone else is acting it out in front of you. History has repeated this lesson countless times. Entire nations have followed leaders who used fear, false unity, and empty promises to rise to power. Crowds looked on with admiration, blind to the fact that the speeches were carefully crafted traps. Those who didn't believe they themselves could ever deceive couldn't imagine that others were deceiving them on such a massive scale. And this is why manipulators thrive in the modern world. They don't invent new tricks, they rely on your denial. They count on you refusing to admit that you, too, could lie if you had to. They count on you refusing to see the shadow, both yours and theirs. But when you face your own shadow, their power begins to crumble. You recognize the act, the rehearsed words, the false vulnerability. You've seen the mask before because you've worn it. The lesson is clear. It's not enough to fear the darkness in others. You must first acknowledge it in yourself. Only then can you see through the games, the smiles, the traps before they close around you. We spend most of our lives running from the parts of ourselves we fear. The envy, the rage, the selfish desires we bury under politeness. But here's the truth: what you run from owns you. What you confront becomes yours to control. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is your armor if you dare to face it. When you admit that you are capable of deception, you learn to detect deception. When you accept your own flashes of cruelty, you learn to see cruelty before it strikes. When you acknowledge your hunger for power, you spot the glint of it in someone else's eyes. This is not about glorifying darkness, it's about integrating it. Pretending to be pure only makes you fragile, but facing your flaws makes you resilient. The more honest you are about your own capacity for harm, the harder it becomes for anyone to use harm against you. A wise mind doesn't deny its shadow, it uses it. The person who says, "I could never be manipulative," will always be easy prey. But the person who admits, "Yes, I could manipulate if I chose to, but I won't," is untouchable, because they see the same moves in others long before the game is played. Psychologists call this integration, taking the rejected parts of yourself and weaving them into awareness, journaling your darker thoughts instead of hiding them, reflecting on the emotions you fear instead of denying them, even therapy, where you dare to say out loud the things you swore you'd never admit. Each step pulls the shadow out of the dark and into the light, where it can no longer control you. And here's the paradox most people never understand. By facing the darkness inside you, you don't become more dangerous to the world, you become less vulnerable to it. Your shadow, once your fear, becomes your shield. Because when you know what you're capable of, no one can use it against you. For most people, the shadows of their own minds are invisible, or worse, ignored. They walk through life, believing danger exists only in others, never realizing that the key to survival lies within themselves. The truth is simple, yet terrifying. To see the darkness in others, you must first see it in yourself. Every lie you might have told, every manipulation you could have used, every selfish desire you have suppressed, these are the very tools that teach you to recognize them in the world. By confronting your shadow, you gain an internal radar. You see the false kindness, the hidden agendas, the subtle manipulations. You detect the predator not by fear, but by understanding the knowledge of what could be done if the roles were reversed. And here lies the paradox. The parts of yourself you feared, that you once denied, become the parts that protect you. Awareness of your own darkness is not weakness, it is power. Not arrogance, but insight. Not cruelty, but clarity. So, remember this: the moment you stop running from the darkness within, you stop being prey to the darkness outside. The moment you face your own shadow, manipulators, liars, and predators lose their edge. And in that moment, you become untouchable not because the world has changed, but because you have.